You are Bitcoin Willy Wonka, according to Comedy Central's Trevor Noah.
Really? Yeah. That's an amazing. You had right there in the little TV screen, Trevor Noah of The Daily Show talking about Max Keiser and all the mayhem he's creating all over the world with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I would play the clip, of course, but he played clips of Max. But, the YouTube algorithm would take us down. Should we play a clip back of him playing a clip of us? All very meta, right? Well, speaking of meta and Max Keiser being the Willy Wonka of Bitcoin, the world is falling into the, what Max has been saying for a long time, what Keiser Report has been reporting for 10 years now. We started 10 years ago right here on Keiser Report talking about Bitcoin, and nations are falling, billionaires are falling, and the latest is Russian billionaire Oleg Deripaska blasts Bank of Russia for ignoring Bitcoin. Quote, even poor El Salvador has taken a simple path recognizing Bitcoin as a means of payment. As we reported, El Salvador has passed a law whereby Bitcoin is now legal tender in El Salvador. And here this guy from Russia, billionaire, wants to Russia to do the same.
Well, he's absolutely right. And what we've been saying on this show is kicking in. You've got global hash war, as I call it. The countries are now competing to accumulate the most Bitcoin. It's part of the game theory that's built into the incentive stack. That is the magic of Bitcoin. And it was unpredictable who exactly would take the first step. We had talked about possibly Japan, possibly Iran, possibly Russia. Turns out that El Salvador is taking the first step toward a Bitcoin standard, making Bitcoin legal tendered. Their GDP is now set to triple. Property prices are already rising. There are people flooding into the country to take advantage of this Shangri-La of Bitcoin. And yeah, a Russian billionaire is right to say that it's time for Russia to do the same thing. It's the ultimate chess move. I hope they don't wait too much longer because, we've been on here for 10 years saying this exact same thing.
Okay, El Salvador is a tiny economy and only has a population of something like 6 million people. But, they have volcanic energy. They have geothermal energy. But you can't export geothermal energy, and that's a problem. With Bitcoin, they could start exporting geothermal energy, i.e. mining Bitcoin. The same thing with oil or natural gas rich countries like Russia. Look at the pipeline dramatics, like all the geopolitical tension about that. Well, you don't even need to build pipelines. You just mine Bitcoin, and that's the money you earn from it. Like Bitcoin changes a lot of things.
Yeah, it's what Iceland's been doing for years, right? They have geothermal energy and they export it in the form of aluminum ingots, right? So they have aluminum smelters in Iceland and they smelt the aluminum, then they export the aluminum and they export their free energy essentially from geothermal. El Salvador has essentially almost free energy from volcanic eruptions from the geothermal. They can mine Bitcoin, turn energy into Bitcoin. Now they've got a hard currency and they can now play. The World Bank tried to say, hey, you can't do it. And then El Salvador said, no, your charter actually says we can do it. So the World Bank will have to rewrite their charter. But the World Bank is irrelevant. So is the IMF. So is Christine Lagarde in the face of Bitcoin. And so now you've got a situation where Jack Mallers has a company called Lightning Strike. They are signing up 20,000 people a day in El Salvador. You mentioned they've got a population of 6 million. That means that within a year, the entire population of this country will be on Lightning Network, which is second layer Bitcoin, doing payments and earning and sending remittances, are going to add billions of dollars to that economy by cutting out the middlemen, like Western Union that charges exorbitant fees. So this is a country that is defining the 21st century. And the longer other countries wait, the worse it'll be for them because the price will just keep going higher. And there's no worry about, what's the central bank going to do? Now, contrast that to the United States, for example. You've got the entire political spectrum you've got one side of the political spectrum, mostly Democrats and liberals, begging the central bank to print more money for their social justice agenda. And you've got the other side, mostly Republicans on the right, who are begging the central bank to stop printing money because you're fiscally being irresponsible and you're destroying the dollar. And get rid of all that. You don't need the central bank. Just outsource your entire monetary policy to Bitcoin. You see this brilliantly played out almost every day on Twitter. by one of the MPs in Canada, who gets up and makes speeches every day about the dangers of money printing. And imagine Canada, if you removed all that conflict from the Canadian government, if all governments in the world can remove all of the internecine conflicts that come around because you've got a central bank that's doing stuff that most people believe is irrelevant, fraudulent, or both.
Well, since the pandemic and the lockdowns, of course, we've seen extraordinary money printing measures. We've been covering that for the past year. And the inflation is starting to hit hard, that even Fed members that are relative doves compared to the rest.
This is when suddenly it gets real, because suddenly energy and food prices start ratcheting it up in ways where you suddenly can't afford the same food and energy that you were able to afford. And now you're asking questions. Why is the purchasing power of my fiat money collapsing? Where did this come from? Well, we've been saying this now for 10 years, and we're trying to prepare you for this. Now it's hitting, the inflation. The Fed is saying two things that are both fraudulent. Number one, they're saying it's transitory. It's not. Or secondly, they'll say it's not inflation, it's deflation. They define rising prices on the grocery cart and at the energy pump as deflationary. Why? The same way that, for the reason that Charles Manson talked about his escapades in Los Angeles as being somehow freeing for the people that he was slaughtering, right? They're psychopaths. They're psychopaths.
In terms of it being transitory, a lot of what we've been doing over the past 20 years since the elevation of China into the WTO is we've been able to mask a lot of the inadequacies of an all global fiat system, especially domestically, as we're sending jobs overseas as part of the Triffin dilemma. The thing is that the price of goods, and especially goods, have been getting cheaper and cheaper because of China, right? Well, that is ending as well. And this chart, imports to the U.S. are now a source of inflationary rather than deflationary pressure, dollar weakness driving price increases. And you could see that it started with the pandemic, and this is the inflation and the goods coming from China. And this is the amount of the US dollar trading against a basket of currencies globally. So you have two things, as China is starting to have pricing pressure, power. And also in a way, like you saw in the 1970s. This is, remember, we talked about the similarities between now and the 70s, and that basically China has a cartel. They are the single monopoly builder, manufacturer of all goods that are shipped around the world. So they're the only ones still manufacturing. A lot of other economies are shut down. The US is especially still shut down because of the huge amount of UBI, the huge amount of stimulus money going to the people. So because the goods aren't being shipped elsewhere, China does have pricing power, just like the OPEC oil cartel did in the 70s when the U.S. first went off the dollar, the gold standard. Remember, they started to ratchet up the prices because they were like, we don't trust that we're actually getting anything in return for our oil.
So it was a bad idea for Bill Clinton to admit China to the World Trade Organization because 30 years later, as many people predicted, they would simply start raising prices and we would no longer have manufacturing capacity because we shipped all of our factories and jobs to China, and now we are the client state of China.